Can you do? Yeah, can you hear me? Oh, fine. So, how many of you guys went through the pre-read material? Yes, no. Oh, there was a pre-read material sent on the group. Okay, fine. So, for all practical purposes, then I'll have to cover that as well. Okay, just to start off from, are you guys familiar with what are random variables? Yeah. Okay. Yes, no, no. I think okay, fine. I'll tell you. You know what a normal distribution is? We've tried to see it. Okay. And last thing, have you ever heard of a moment generating function? No. You know what an expectation is? Yes? No. Okay, fine. Let us start from there. So, if you look at the pre-read material after the session, please go up and look at the pre-read material. What you see is, some examples about LLM memorization. So, one main question is why even have this section? What's the point of, like, should we care about privacy in AI? What do you think? Any things from your end? Insurance companies, are able to identify some information about you, and then they are able to, decide whether to insure you against a particular disease or not based on that. Or, for example, for a very ubiquitous thing, consider your autocorrect on your phone. Everyone uses the same model, and you type all kinds of things into your phone, including your account usernames and passwords. And ideally, if everyone's using this, like, you should never want someone's autocorrect to print, like, to suggest the password when you give the username. But we still use autocorrect, and we still Google still trains on everyone's typing data to get the autocorrect, to make autocorrect better and all. So how does Google manage to do that without finding obviously identifiable information? Correct? So one thing which seems reasonable to do then is to do something called anonymization. You have sensitive data and you just blank all the sensitive data, replace all the sensitive data with some placeholder that doesn't identify anything. For example, suppose you have a data set with name and say address, maybe district, right? And you have your age, maybe date of birth, and you have some other data. Okay, so now this is something that's typically collected in a census, right? And it's likely that you have all this data. And what we want to do is, maybe one thing which you can think of doing is to, instead of don't give any names, just give some identifier. You want to do, so that you don't, you're not able to find anything. What do you think is a potential issue with that? So basically the setting is, I am some hospital, I have this data set of the patients that have come to me, and so suppose some other columns are also there, and I decide that I want to release one data set for public use, so that people can maybe study the kind of diseases that are happening in the region, something like that. So I release this data set, and I don't want to know whether this person has this particular disease or not, because certain disease say stigma, or you just don't want it to be available for example insurance conditions like that. So what you do is you decide that you will anonymize it with identifiers instead of thing. Can you think of one case where this will fail?
Because of genetic segmentation between
in some sense, if you have external data, in some sense, right? If you know how parents and children are related,
you can learn that from doing.
Yeah, for example, if you have and some other records, right? If you so okay, so can you tell me about how will you go about identifying whether someone is a parent or child?
Only the same surname.
Same surname is no.
Only first name.
First name is also not right. Just not right.
No, you asked me the distance.
He's asking, is there a way that you
I
use
also-
this kind of de-anonymization and now you will still be able to identify a single person exactly using this data? Even though his name has been erased, can you still find out who that person is?
I don't think so.
Pin code and
Pin code and date of birth, you can easily identify the individual. Exactly. So the thing is, if you have some other source of information which has pin code and date of birth, then this is useless, right? So in some sense, you want it to be so. Okay. Let's look at things we would like. Okay, I'll replace things with properties. Okay. And the idea is, if for a particular algorithm, if I have one data set and if I have another data set and I apply the algorithm on the same data set, if I apply the algorithm 2 times, I should not be worse off in some sense. Okay. Okay. So now that's a good point. Pin code and date of birth gives away a lot of people, but maybe a good way to do it is to ensure that within this data set it's not uniquely identified. So what I can do is maybe instead of giving date of birth, I just give age. This is a much coarser metric, right? And now maybe what I can ensure is that some group of k people in this entire data set all share the same attributes.
But does the date of birth and age be the same data?
No, date of birth will give you the month and the date, right? So in one pin code,
Okay, age.
yeah, age is much closer.
Yeah.
So you are decreasing the amount of information available, and what you are doing is you are trying to ensure that within this data set, some k people have exactly the same records. So in that sense, if you get external information, you still don't know which of these k they are. Okay. Now the issue with this is, if like this time I decided to convert year to age, correct? Date of birth to age. Next time, suppose I change pin code to state or something. So I again apply some sort of anonymization algorithm, right? But if I have the same data set, I apply 2 different anonymization algorithms, and now I get both of them side by side. It's possible that I will be able to break the thing. Does that make sense? So in some sense, so what we have is, you know, in data set 1, you have state, date of birth, and say some distance. And then you have info. Here. And here you have some k people, and here you have some other sets of people. Say they are people of the same location. Okay, I say one hospital is going to cater to only one kind of people, one set of people. So now what's going to happen is I look at this pin code and data, and I look at state and or some other district maybe. I take district and date of birth, and I compare whether the date of birth correlates with the age, and I can calculate age from date of birth, I can calculate report district, and put all this information together and narrow down my case samples. Does that make sense? Like at least it seems plausible that maybe with the right combination of things, or suppose with sufficient number of data, because a government, for example, will release reports of all kinds all throughout the year. Maybe you settle all these reports together, you'll be able to enter whatever information you need. So in some sense, you want to be able to apply the algorithm, maybe in different settings, but still not lose privacy even if you are separate. Okay? Now, one more thing which you want is, suppose you have a very kind of, suppose it's again a disease, right? And you know in this data set that 5 people living in this particular pin code of this particular year, say males, have this particular disease, or some of them, one of the 5 have this disease, and with side information you are able to identify which those 5. You don't know like whether record 1 refers to me and record 2 refers to you, but you know that record 1 and 2 has information of both of us. Does that make sense? That is, if I have some information, some of those, and one of these guys has say some disease. Okay, and I am able to figure out that these guys are between A, B, D, C. Okay, between these 3 people. So now I know that one of A, B, C, people have disease A, even if as a group I have not lost privacy. Does that also make sense? And ideally even this is bad, because I could just selectively target these 3 people and it will still be harmful even if as a population has not lost information. So nice properties that you want to have is one thing called composition. Composition is the idea that if you have multiple algorithms on same data, you should not be worse. So if you have M1 algorithm A1 and if you have algorithm A2 on data, you should not be worse off than A1, A2. Or even if you are worse off, the rate at which you become worse off should be controlled. So in the K anonymization, so this thing where you ensure that K records are the same, there is something called K anonymization. Okay? It's called K anonymization. So the issue with K anonymization is, it's possible that there exist 2 separate instances of K anonymization that completely breaks all the privacy that you have set up. This is a very bad situation. You want to ensure that irrespective of whatever algorithm happens, your privacy guarantees become worse very slowly. Okay? So that is one thing which you want is composition. Another thing which you want is you want to be able to have some qualitative way to distinguish. Okay? Sorry, a quantitative way. Now, quantitative way to show privacy guarantees, why would this be useful? If you just randomly anonymize, you still don't know how private the data is. So then the question is, what exactly, how can we even think of defining how private it is? So maybe that's a question we should try to target. Another thing which we want to do is it should be robust against post-processing. that's what happened with the anonymization, right? I had two data sets which were anonymized in different ways, and I'm able to sit and read through all that data, maybe with some other side information, and break all of this. So whatever further processing I do on the data, I should not make it worse. It's also possible that say today I don't have the data or the capabilities to do it, but sometime in the future some extremely big, like extremely well-funded person who was very interested in finding my data has all algorithm access in the world. Even in that case, that adversary also should not be able to identify my data. That is the kind of guarantees we want to provide. As in mathematically impossible to distinguish, or mathematically not possible to distinguish up to certain guarantees, right? Okay. And last thing that we like is group privacy. So group privacy is exactly what I want. Group privacy, for example, is the example which I told for those three. You know one of the three have this disease, even though the whole data set is anonymized, you can like maybe lose the privacy of one particular subset, even if the privacy of the whole data set as a statistic is not lost. So these are the criteria that we want to meet. Okay, so now one thing which I probably should ask is, what if we don't give any of this individual data and we just give standard statistical information? Okay, for example, your company keeps a record of or IITM keeps a record of placements, right? You ideally don't want people to know exactly how much each person got. But if, for example, and you suppose you give only the average, you don't just give the average, the CPC average across the entire campus. As the offers come in, you update the average. Now, do you see where this is still not ideal? CPC in some sense is one of those things where you care only about the statistics, right? Maybe you care about only the median, maybe the mean, maybe some branch-wise stats, but you don't really care about individual people's CPC, and ideally they shouldn't come out also. So, if that's the case, then is reporting average CPC as the offers come in a good idea. Yeah, so what is the sum? So average CPC is summation of the CPC of one person, say xi, whole divided by the number of people that you are taking this average one.
Right bigger.
Right bigger?
Next.
Okay. So now if I get, now so far so good. Now if I get a new person, right, then I will get summation. So this is C x bar at time step equal to 1, and at the next time step I equal to 1 up to n plus 1, xi whole divided by n plus 1 is equal to x bar at t equal to 2. Now can you see that I can post process, I can just multiply this, subtract both, and I can figure out what the CPC of the xi plus 1 is.
Yeah.
But what if we have like many people xi plus t is equal to
You add multiple people at a time, but even then maybe some information about that multiple, even that subset group. Even if you didn't know about the whole group, you still know something about the subset. For example, if they cause a huge variation of mean, you really know one thing or the other, which again is information you don't want to do. Okay, so now so in some sense, what we want to be able to do is to be able to protect the privacy of every individual, even if the data sets that we are working with differ by only one data point. So this say is drawn from some data set B, and this is drawn from some data set D prime, and the only difference between D and D prime is that D prime is D union Xi. Other than that, it's an identical data set, and what we want to do is we want to see how difficult it is to distinguish between these two data sets. Okay? So let us formalize that a bit. So this is the notion of adjacency. Neighborhood. So this is, you have one data set B and you have another data set D prime which is identical to D except that it has say one extra data, and we want to determine how difficult is it to distinguish between. So suppose we apply algorithm A on B, we apply algorithm A on B prime, how difficult it is. So now before we go ahead, we will go to another example. A much simpler example to establish some nice properties that we want, like some basic math that we need. Okay. So very simple setting. I give you a coin, okay, and I tell you this coin can be of two kinds. Like I have a bunch of coins. All coins are of two kinds. We have coin one, okay, where the probability of it giving heads. So coin 1, okay, so probability for coin 1 is 50% heads and 50% tails. And I have another coin 2 So I have this bag. Okay, this bag has two kinds of coins. Head one like with this thing and that thing. That two probabilities. And I give you out of this bag. I take one coin and give you. And my question to you is to tell me what is the kind of coin that I've given you. Is it a fair coin or is it a biased coin? How will you do it? Toss it. So some strategy if you want to do it is to say toss it 10 times and then see whether it's what to say fair or biased. Okay, so let's do that. So suppose we toss it 10 times. You get so possibly what are the outcomes that you can get? You can get I'm counting the number of heads. Okay. So I'll count the number of heads possible, right? You could have 0 heads, you could have 1 head, you could have 2 heads, or you could have 9 heads or 10 heads. Suppose you toss the coin 10 times. These are the all possibility of number of heads occurring in 10 heads. Okay. So now what is the question that you want to answer is given that I have some empirical observation of the number of flips that I have, is it more likely that it is a biased coin or it is a fair coin? Okay? Does everyone follow that? So that's the notion of a likely. given the numerical data, what is the parameter? Okay, so let us try to do this. Can you tell me? Suppose I got x heads. What is the and the probability, like this p value is p. What is the probability that I'll get, say, 5 heads? What distribution is this one from? Do you know? Have you heard of a binomial distribution? Okay, let's see. So suppose I got 5. Suppose I got x heads, right? And I have 10 possible throws. So there is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Correct? So from 10 I can choose whatever x positions. 10 choose 2, 10 choose x. And in each of these I had probability p of getting heads or 1 minus p of getting tails. So p power x is 1 minus p power 10 minus x. Is that right? That's the probability of me seeing x heads for a coin of flipping probability p. So we call that the likelihood. L p is equal to okay, and why is this called the likelihood? So suppose let's think of an example. Let us say x equal to 10, right? So let's do that. Yeah, we suppose x equal to 10, right? Then you're going 10 choose 10, p power 10. So then you are either getting 0.5 power 10 or 0.8 power 10. And this gives you a feel for how likely the observation of getting 10 coin tosses, 10 continuous heads is possible given the two basis hypotheses that we do. So maybe that is also worth defining. So we have two hypotheses. One is called the null hypothesis. Where we assume that the coin is flipped. And then we have the alternate hypothesis. Where we assume that it is bad. Okay. So, if you don't mind, can you help me plot this for p equal to? Okay. Have you come across binomial distribution before? Yes? No? Somewhat. Okay. So if you what we want to do is I want to plot this function as a function of x actually. So at some particular p. So I'll give you some information for now. The mean of this is mu is given by np and the variance is given by np into 1. Do you guys know what mean and variance are? Yeah? Okay, fine. So this is for 0.5, what is it? 0.5 into 10 is 5. 0.5 into 10 is 8. Sorry, 0.8 into 10 is this. This is 10 into 0.5 into 0.5. 0.2.5. And this is 10 into 1 by 5 into 4 by 5, which is 1 by 6. Correct? So what you're going to have is anti 5 and anti 8. So this is 0. I have walked it there. Here you have a distribution that's, you know, something like this, and this variance is lesser, but I mean probability has to sum up to 1, so the area of the curve is to be same, so that is slightly sharper. Okay, so this is the distribution that you have. Everyone follows here? Mean, variance, this variance is larger, that variance is small. Probability distributions have to be normalized, so that's why this is normal. Okay? So, now, let's come back to our coin tossing problem. So, the setting is we want to create some, we want to find at what point, at how many heads do I say that, you know, the coin is biased. Right? So, suppose I say that if I see 8 heads, or if I see 7 heads, like up to 7 heads, I will say coin is not biased. Right? Beyond that, I will say coin is biased. So I am setting some threshold. Now, look at this. What does this region tell you? Huh? Low probability, but it also tells you that I'm saying here in this region I say H1, and in this region I put H0. So if the coin is actually biased, actually unbiased, but still there is like some probability that it will end up in this region. Okay, so that in some sense is the probability that x is greater than some threshold. X is greater than or equal to some threshold P, given that P is equal to is this, right? And this is called the false possibility. Right? I am changing my hypothesis even though actually it was the coin itself was unbiased. Does that make sense? Okay. So we will call this one. There is one more thing that you want to care about, which is the probability that okay, and this is called the all. Okay. So let us work through this a bit more. Now, typically you want to set a particular threshold, and I mean like you don't want to be unnecessarily around. So let's just make this. Okay, let me fill this. I reject H0 when the coin was fed. What is this case? I reject H0 even when the coin was fed. That's this, right? Yeah. So that is false positive. False positive. So that happens with rate alpha. I reject H1 when the coin is fed. That is okay. Coin is biased, which is I reject H0 when the coin was biased, that is this. Oh sorry, that is 1 minus this. I reject H0. I reject H0 when the coin was biased. So I am saying the false. I reject at 0 in the conditions, and that's the function. And that happens with rate 1 minus beta. And the coin is biased, and I take H1. This is very key. I reject H1 is. Have I made a mistake? Okay. So again, what you want to do is you want to make both of these as small as possible, right? You want to like you want both the wrong conditions, which is the diagonal and this condition and this condition, to be as small as possible. Now, in what settings is it as small as possible? Let me maybe to compare against this, let us take instead of n equal to 10, let us take n equal to 50. 10, let's just read out the graph. So n is what could be np, so that is 50 into 0.5, which is 25. So 25, 50 into 0.8 is what?
40.
40. So now you have here, something here, and now if you see both these errors are probably far lesser because the overlap is much smaller. And if you compare, I do not have good. Maybe we can show it. Like the best way to do it is actually maybe we'll pull up the small. But intuitively, the nice thing to see is if the number of trials is very small, right? If you have only one trial, probably it's going to be very difficult to distinguish between whether the coin is fair or not. But as we increase the number of trials, these two distributions are going to be moving away from each other. Because right now this mean is like 5 and 7, so the difference only 2. Now when you move here, the mean is like 25 and it's 40, and the difference between them is a lot more. So the like there's a huge separation. Maybe my talk. What was pretty clear. It's going to be more like. And this one. And now, for example, if you set a threshold here, you can be pretty sure that it's a good threshold, and like you will know for sure whether the coin is blind. That seems very intuitive. The more you flip, the easier it is to tell the two distributions apart. So in some sense, if I want this condition, right? I have two algorithms, and I wanted to make it difficult to distinguish between the algorithms data set A and B, right? What should I ideally be doing? I should make the probability. So suppose I have some probability associated with the algorithm trained on data set B giving out some set of outputs S, and this is probability that some algorithm trained on trying is giving some outputs S. And ideally what I would want them to be able to do is I would want to keep those distributions as close to each other as possible. Right? So if these two are very close to each other, it becomes very hard to distinguish between them, but if these move far apart like this, then it becomes almost trivial to identify the two situations. And why that is important is, if you are able to easily identify between the two distributions, you can clearly see whether data point X was used for training on. So that is the second. In some sense, you want to make it as difficult as possible to distinguish between the data sets. Okay, so now that is the problem. So what is the setting so far? We let's just do a quick recap. Obviously, we wanted to make AI algorithm, some algorithm private. And we saw that we don't want to lose the privacy associated with any individual. So what we do is we want to see if I have two data sets that are very close to each other except for one data point, we want to see how hard it is to distinguish between them. them. Then we took an example of this coin toss and we are saying there are two hypotheses. In this thing also you can have two hypotheses. The data point is there or the data point is not. Similarly, you have in the setting of two hypotheses, coin is fair or coin is biased, and you're trying to figure out what is the scenario. You want to minimize the wrong yes, right, as much as possible, which is the false possibility rate now. Yeah. So now we still want to be able to, and you want to make this as best as possible, right? And there is now a useful data. Okay. So before that, okay, are you with me so far? Do you have any doubts, questions? Okay. So can you recap the setting? What is happening is I'm flipping the coin 10 times. I got some number of heads, and what I am saying is if the number of heads is 8, 9, or 10, the coin is biased, else the coin is unbiased. Okay, but how did I come up with this set? Right? I mean, like there should be some logic to what your threshold should be. Otherwise, t can be arbitrary. So let's just maybe come up with the probabilities of it. The probability that x is greater than equal to t given that the coin is unbiased. Okay, that is right on this probabilities. I pre-calculated this for you, and for 8 heads the probability is 0.055. For 9 heads it is 0.011. For 10 heads it is 0.002. Okay. So how we go about this is we first decide on how much incorrectness we allow ourselves, right? And suppose we want to be wrong at max with the probability of 0.0, right? And then we don't want to say that the coin is biased when it is not with the probability of 0.0. Basically, we are saying this area is equal to 0.0. Okay. So if that is the threshold, then we kind of have to take C as the 9th and 10th case, because adding these two will give you what 0.012, which is within the 0.05 threshold. So suppose I set C to be 9 and 10. So what I am saying is, if I get 9 or 10 heads, I'm going to say it's biased, and I'm going to be wrong only 0.012% of the time, which I suppose is very few. Okay, but the other side is okay. So that's there. So you're defining this threshold based on how wrong you allow yourself to be. Now, one thing, you still want the now, yeah, you still want an optimal test, right? And there is so what you are saying is there is some test which is going to take the ratio of these two likelihoods that we got, and what we are going to say is if the ratio of the likelihoods is less than some constant, some new constant, for some constant. Okay, yeah, for some constant K. For some K, we are able to use the ratio of the probabilities and for the best possible thing, we are able to determine whether we want to take data set, whether we want to reject the null hypothesis or not. Let us just take a second and look at that formula again. L theta 0 by L theta 2. It's the ratio of this to this, right? So this is large here, and it's large up to a certain extent, and then it is flipping. So maybe somewhere here is probably the place where we want to keep the threshold, and then it goes to this. Okay. So that in some sense is so one thing which I suppose you should notice in this case is the threshold that is setting here is also related to how the false positivity rate that you are using. Does that make sense? Okay. Now the main statement of this theorem is this is the optimal test. Like there is no other test that you can do to distinguish between the two probabilities, two hypotheses. That's okay. So now if that is the statement, logically we would want to extend that to our situation as well, which is to determine whether these two are same or not. And what we are going to say is that D belongs to S whole divided by S is okay. So what we are going to say is, so do you see the similarity between those two, between this and that? Maybe it doesn't make sense to work out. Maybe the post the session notes I will work this out as an example and show that you can like put in all the probabilities and see that this is the best possible system. Do you have any questions? No? Okay. So let's take a minute and look at what this means. Okay, you have again the setting is you have two adjacent data sets. You have the algorithm, some order algorithm, maybe an ML model that you train on both data sets. Here arbitrarily you choose one, and like your point was right? Arbitrarily you choose one of those models. It gives some output. That output belongs to set S. And you want to see what is the probability that it is from algorithm trained on data set D or D prime. From naming Pearson, you are saying the ratio of the probabilities give you the linear ratio, the likelihoods give you the best possible test statistic, and that should be less than some threshold, and that threshold is D bar. Okay. So yeah. So basically what I'm saying is, if it is within this threshold, you will choose the null hypothesis, but if it is outside the threshold, you will take the alternate hypothesis. So basically you're saying, if it is within threshold, data point X was not used. If it is outside the threshold, data point X was used. Ideally, to protect privacy, you want it to be impossible for them to say that it was used. No, you should like the point is if this threshold is so let's look at that direction, right? want to make it as hard as possible to distinguish between A of B, okay, and A of B prime. So from a privacy preserving situation, which is better, you want it to be as difficult to distinguish both, right? If it is very difficult to distinguish both, then you can't confidently say whether data point X was which used or not, right? So that is the setting that you want to do. Okay. And in some sense, let us just work. Let me just make the setting clear once again. Yeah. So you have two parties. You have your A. So you have your model creator, and you have your address. Model creator makes A, B, and B, right? Randomly chooses one of them with, say, randomly chooses one of them. And the most interesting part of this whole game is that the adversary has access to the entire data set, has access to X, has access to what algorithm you are using. Yeah, it's like all possible information except whether you gave A or D prime, A of D or A of D prime in that. Does that make sense so far? Is everyone following? So in some sense, it's a very strong setting. Okay, if you think about model training, if you're training an LLM, you kind of know the data set maybe, at least. The data set you know because everything on the internet. Okay. Maybe X also you know because that is the data set maybe the data that you're trying to predict. A lot of the times you may or may not know A, in the sense that you may know the model, you may not know the model. You may know how they are anonymizing the algorithm, you may not know that. But in this setting, they are assuming that you know everything. Okay. You know everything, and you can, so this is directly choosing one of these. So directly choosing one of these and now I'm calling these. And you can query X how many ever times you want. Okay. Okay. That's the setting. So it's quite a strong setting. Yeah. Okay. So now maybe one good thing is to work through to see whether these properties that we wanted hold. Group privacy, I suppose, is reasonable because you're not even able to distinguish one data point over the set of all data points, so you're not leaking any privacy that way. Quantitative way to show privacy guarantees, I suppose that is the quantitative way. You are able to specify some epsilon threshold that tells you how difficult it is to distinguish between these two data sets. Robust against post-processing in the in the post-session notes I'll add a proof for showing that robustness. And composition. Let us think about composition once. Which I think this is the best. Okay. So suppose you have trained on the same data. A1 and A2. Okay, and your adversary has access to both models. So basically, you want to say the probability that A1, A1D, and A2 also trained on D belongs to some set, because both can give different set of outputs. Okay, so now what I want you to tell me is, if these two models are independently trained, right, then I can split these probabilities as probability of A1 of D giving output as 1 into probability of A2 of D giving output as 2, all divided by probability of A1 of D giving output as A1 D prime, probability of A2 of D prime. Okay. Now, if each of these were epsilon dp, so this is called the definition of epsilon differential privacy. Okay, definition of epsilon. So if each of these algorithms were epsilon differentially private, this ratio we know, this ratio we know, right? This is less than or equal to what? E raised power epsilon 1 times e raised power epsilon 2, which is equal to e raised power epsilon 1 plus epsilon 2. So in some sense, if you have two algorithms, if you have say k algorithms, each of those are epsilon 1 up to epsilon k dp, then your composition is epsilon 1 plus epsilon 2 plus epsilon k dp. Okay? In some sense, this is still better than, this is way better than k anonymization, because in k anonymization you could have two different data sets and you lose all privacy. Here, you don't lose all privacy, but suppose for simplifying, if everything is epsilon, then you basically get k epsilon. So with composition, this grows linearly. Okay? Now, the issue is, this is kind of too strict. Okay. Obviously, like just to think of this, if you put let's put. So e power 0.1 is some small number. I use calculator to find out. E power 1 is 2.7, which is alright. E power 10 is 23,000 something. So you're saying that the ratio of probability is some threshold 23,000 times is I don't think is a very good guarantee. Again, if you look at that thing, you're saying that the threshold is wherever is such that this is 23,000 times bigger than this, which basically means they are already pretty far apart, right? So if you keep going up, I don't think you are getting very good price, right? So high threshold means high price, low pricing, right? So now think about gradient descent. Gradient descent, you have say 10,000 steps. Each step you ensure that it is 0.1 epsilon dp. So now you have composition result is telling you it is k epsilon. So it is 10,000 into epsilon. So that becomes 1,000. So you are getting e power 1,000, which is some astronomically large number. It basically means not going to take forever. There is no privacy. These two distributions are so far apart that it is absolute chilling. Right? There is no pricing happening. We went through all very hard work to come up with impossibly hard definition, which is practically of nodes.
For some particular data point.
Yes, very good point. For some particular data point, it's possible that for most data points, if you remove them from the data sets, it's not very different. But there, like for some data point in the entire data set, you've seen, right? If you change, it's possible that if you change that one data point, the model drastically changes. If the model drastically changes, now you are good, right? So the idea is exactly like what Paksha told. These ultra rare scenarios where maybe this field we don't want to check for all possible data sets. We want to allow us some leeway. Because what if in the whole data set, the probability of something like that happening is like so small. Like you never ever reach a scenario where the distributions are so far apart. And ideally you want to like account for this. And how you do that is you say the probability becomes less minus is per second. So now, what does this mean?
Less than
Should be less than.
Yeah, my bad. So, what does this mean? If you look at so you're allowing yourself some delay in this. So if earlier you saw that if this is say 1000 times. Okay, let us do this. Okay, let us come back here and let us look at this one. So you want probability of A belonging to X divided by probability in time belonging to S, right? If I have a continuous distribution, instead of writing this, I can use their what to say. Then probability distributions. Probability density functions. Have you heard of PDFs? No. Okay. So some of you have this. Some I have been handy using them. The idea is you have some. You want to find what is the probability that okay. You know what a random variable is? No. Okay. Your random variable is basically some variable where the outcome of the experiment determines the value here. Okay. And basically we want to say what is the probability that the random variable is between A and B, which basically is now for continuous. For discrete variables you can like for points and all you know exactly what they are. For continuous variables you have to define them over an interval, and what you're going to say is that the probability that X is between A and B is equal to some integral of the probability distribution from A to B. So that function which gives you this relation is a probability distribution. As long as this is positive and this integrates to 1, because the outcome of X being anything should be 1. Follow me so far? Okay, so what you can do is, I just took log on subsets and you get some relation. And the thing is, you can define a probability distribution for this variable as well. Okay, you can define a probability distribution for this variable as well, which is called the okay. So let us just make sense of all these things. So you can associate, a function of a probability distribution is also a function of a random variable is also a random variable. You can define a new distribution based on this, which is the ratio of the two probability distributions, as long as your outputs are drawn from A or B. Okay. And now this definition which I wrote here can be equivalently written as this: the probability that Z is drawn from this priv loss distribution. The probability that Z is greater than 0 is 0. Right? Now, what we want to make a relaxation is that the probability that Z is greater than epsilon is some small quantity. Okay? Basically, earlier we were saying that that for any two data sets you should never be able to break the threshold. Now you are saying maybe even if you break the threshold, you break the threshold with some very low probability data, and as long as that is the case, it's alright. We are still going to say that the data sets are sufficiently difficult to distinguish. Okay, and this is called, and the alternate formulation was probability that we have B down into S minus epsilon from time S less time. Okay. So these were equivalent ways of formulating. Okay, so in some sense, maybe at this point it is good to do some basic ones. Let us do some more basic. First thing that we want to do is the idea of an expectation, because you guys told you are not used to it. So let's look at this. Let's say we have a dice, right? The one comes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we have a pair dice which are 1.6, 6, 1.6, 1.6, 1.6, and 1.6. Correct? And we have one fair dice which is 0.6. Okay? If you roll this T1 dice, which number are you most likely to get? T1. If you are going to roll T0 dice, which number are you most likely going to get when you roll? No. Okay, alright. But if I keep doing it, also any number, right? Yeah. What is the average number that I'm going to get? Okay, you're right. If I roll it once, I'm going to get any number. If I roll it again, I'm going to get any number. If I roll it third time, I'm going to get some random number. Now, if I take the average of all of the numbers I've seen so far, what is the number I'm going to get? Why do you say 3?
Because all the essential properties of computing.
So what you're doing is you're just you're doing 1 by n times summation over all some instance etc. So what you want to do, how you might want to think about it is you know maybe group the terms and you see the number of times 3 occurs. So in some sense you can group all the 3's together. You can take group all the 1's together, take 1 out. Suppose it appears 10 times, whole divided by n. Plus group all the 2's together, which say suppose appears 20 times into 1 into 2 divided by n. Plus group all the 6's together, suppose that appears 9 times divided by n into 6. And you add this. Does that make sense? That's the same thing as adding this. Okay. Now this, can you look at this term? It is the number of times 1 occurred in your trials divided by the total number of trials, which is the probability of getting 1. This is the number of times 2 occurred divided by the total number of trials, which is the probability of getting 2. This is the number of times 6 occurred divided by the number of trials, which is the probability of getting 6. So in some sense, we are going to call the expected value of the for discrete distributions as sum over I probability that x equal to I times. Okay? It is the probability that you are getting a particular value into that. Similarly, in the continuous case, expectation. Okay? And one very nice property of this thing is that if you have expectation of 2 things, you can break this. X and Y are both random variables of the same distribution. This is equal to so that's a very nice property. Okay. So, yes, this should be very nice. It doesn't need to be if they are not the linearity rules. We are mainly the session outside. Okay. Where was it? Yeah. What was the variance for the map? Correct? So in some sense, you can calculate E of expectation of x, then you calculate expectation of x square, and with those two terms you calculate variance. Like that you can calculate higher order terms, giving you other statistical terms. So related to, so one of them is called kurtosis, the other one is called skewness. You keep calculating higher order terms, combine them in appropriate ways, and you will get some information about the kind of distribution you are dealing with. Okay, so now my question is, what if there was a way where you could, in one shot, get all distributions, all of these expectations? I'm saying, in one shot, what if there was a way you get expectation x, expectation square, expectation x cube, expectation of x power n, so on. Can you think of something? Maybe not directly, but Huh? What?
Something like DNS.
Something like DNS, because what is this thing tell you? If I take the nth derivative of is per lambda x, what do I get? With respect to lambda. First derivative with respect to lambda, I get this term, and I'm setting x equal to 0, oh, lambda equal to 1. I said lambda equal to 0, all these hierarchies are vanished.
Yeah.
Second derivative I get with this, the two factorial cancels out, reduces, and I get x squared. Third derivative if I take, I get x cubed. So another derivative I take, I get x squared. So in some sense, if I am able to do expectation of this, I am winning. And from linearity, I can like break up all of these guys. It just gives me 1 plus lambda times x is lambda square times expectation of x squared plus 1 so on. And now do you see in one shot I have been able to get any expectation I want by taking appropriate derivatives of this. Right? I can just take E and E is for lambda x over here, right? E lambda. Okay. So this is called the first expectation with x power 1 is called the first moment. Okay, this is called the second moment. This is called the third moment. This is called the fourth nth moment. So a function with which you can generate all the moments is called a think of a name that it will generate. Moment generated function. So this is called the moment. Okay, so now why did we take that deviation to do expectation and moment generation? So let's continue with sprint to. So again, the setting is we want to be able to apply our privacy logic to LLMs, right? And LLMs are trained using gradient descent. Gradient descent, you want, you have like 10,000 steps. You want to be able to do that well. Even this definition is not the best. But in some spirit, you want to do it in the spirit of this, right? You want to do stuff in the spirit of this. You want to like estimate the you want to estimate the tails. Let's just take an example. So the probability that z is above epsilon is lesser than delta. So the area of this is less than delta. Is what you are trying to claim. In some sense, you want to get the tail bounds of the tail bounds of probability distribution. I want to say that the tails of the distribution grow or change according to some. That is the because maybe if I can find out some pattern on how they are changing, I can, instead of using that definition, I can use some things. Maybe I can give some form to data. Okay, so this whole notion of doing all of this is what? So concentration measure, I do not plan to take this now because it will take a while, a little bit heavy. But I will add resources in the post phase session. So it's like post phase will be additional stuff that you can read up to make sense of this. The main thing is with concentration of measure, you can come up with alternate definitions for dP. So in some sense, you started with epsilon dP, then you went to epsilon delta dP. Based on concentration of measure, you can define a concentration based dP, and you can define other definitions. Ultimately, that is needed to get a good estimate for your privacy. As in, you don't want some ridiculous estimate in the sense that in an event that happens once in a billion years, my data is going to be not private. So my distribution, like so think about this. Okay, suppose you train a model, train two models, and maybe once in a billion years you train a model. It's in once in a billion years for some data point. The two probability distributions are distinguishable within that threshold. So you are like package is not good. So I mean like that's kind of illogical. So you want to be slightly kinder. So you went to delta, and you want to be a little more kinder. You want to care about the where most of this. You want to care about how often does it actually use privacy and not. So you want to keep a trade-off between how many edge cases you are taking care of and how edge the edge cases actually are. If the edge cases probably never occur, then maybe it is better not to worry. Okay. Now, how you actually implement this in okay, let us just do one thing. So, like we went through a lot of math, but we didn't actually see how we can apply, how we can use this math in any real world, right? So, for example, if I ask, let's go back to a CBC, right? You are giving some CBC. What you can do is you can add noise to the CBC. Yeah. So when you are adding to every single person's CBC, you add some noise. So you have, say, it's 5, 10, 7, 3. Okay, and you have another 5, 10. Sorry. Okay, 5, 7. Yeah. You take the average of this, you are getting what? 15 plus 10, 5, 4. This is what? 6.2. And here you are getting 10, 15. Here you are getting 5. So when you had this data point and did not have this data point, your mean is changing by 1.25. So the sensitivity of your data set is the max overall possible. Okay, max for all this. So in some sense, if I instead of pitching this, if I remove this, I probably get some of the mean. So I keep checking, I remove this, and I keep checking by going one data point at what scene do I get maximum variation. That is the sensitivity of my algorithm. Now what I want to do is instead of actually dealing with this, I add some noise. Okay, to each data point, I add some noise. Some signal noise, maybe some variation. So instead of 5.5, I can say 5.2 or 5.9, whatever. And I choose sigma such that when I add them all up, even if I remove one data point or not, the difference is imperceptible. as an imperceivable as defined by yourself. So the idea is to add noise to your individual data points, and the amount of noise that you add depends on two things, mainly how sensitive your algorithm is in the beginning, obviously, and the privacy threshold that you want. Obviously, if you want more private thing, you have to add noise to more variance here, such that when you add everything together, the means don't vary much. Okay, tell me what setting where this would completely get dominated. If I add a huge amount of noise, whether I have yeah, the data becomes irrelevant because I added so much noise. So I mean, like, you don't want to do that. You want to add just sufficient amount of noise as I make the pricing. That is the setting. So let's think about this. In this setting, CTCs are technically bounded vehicles, and no company has infinite money. But even if they had infinite money, for our purposes of setting sensitivity, what we can do is we will calculate our answer by clipping, ensuring that the CTC is between 0 and some arbitrary number. Okay, this ensures that delta is some finite number. So and that's also useful in cases where we are dealing with data which is not bounded. Okay, so for example, in gradients, gradient could be divided by 0. The gradient can exclude. I'm pretty sure you guys were training some models have come across with. Have you come across infinite gradients in your training so far? Then you should implement the model from scratch. Then you implement the basic neural network then from scratch and try training on that and see how unstable training is. See whether loss goes to infinity. See whether gradient goes to infinity. So like basically gradients are not necessarily bounded. So what you do is you have to bound them, and the way you want to bound them is to keep a limit on the norm that they get. So basically where we are going to now is so that is the setting. You want to make each gradient update differentially private, such that even if you do huge number of updates, you get the final pricing threshold. The actual accounting for this requires a bunch more math, which I will not do. Maybe some other time if the request we can go through that. But the algorithm on how you achieve this is as follows. Okay, this will be part of your reading material as well. So if you want to look at it or implement it yourself later. So, right, in a gradient descent, you can either find the gradients over the entire batch, or you can find the gradients for each mini batch, and update for each mini batch and keep going. So in this setting, what you do is you take a mini batch, you find the gradients for each data point in that batch. Like we discussed, gradients can be unbounded. right? So to have a finite sensitivity, because we don't have a finite sensitivity, what happens? We have delta to be very big, like potentially. So we want to be able to predict all kinds of scenarios, right? So if there is one scenario where someone gets infinite salary, right? What is going to happen is if that infinite salary guy is included or not included, my mean is going to get affected for sure. Like, I cannot do anything about it. If the sensitivity is not finite, I cannot make it finite. So I have to clip my data points. So similarly, I have to clip my norms of my gradient. Right? So first I clip the norms of each gradient up to a certain clip norm, and then I add noise to each of those gradients, and I add. So basically, you have two steps. So you have to compute what entry wise gradients. Then you clip them so that you don't get infinity problems that we just discussed. And now you add some noise to the average of the infinity. And I call this private degrees. And the final update becomes 1 e minus beta of the okay. So this is how. So in training, we want to ensure that your model never, any one data point of your training data set is never identified. This is the method you use. Now what? So there are some things which you have to figure out, right? You have to figure out what clip norm is. You have to figure out what sigma is. You have to figure out what part size to use. You have to figure out what learning rate to use. And you have to figure out the number of iterations, number of gradients that you take. Each of these interplay in interesting ways to, like for example, number of iterations and all these also affect your utility or beauty or modulus. But all of these factors also affect your privacy guarantees. So there is this trade-off. It's possible that you add a lot of noise and you get a shitty model which is private, which no one can control, or you have a very good model where you don't have any noise, which is absolutely wonderful but is not private, and I can extract whatever data I want. So I have to find the set of hyperparameters C, sigma, B, and eta, and T. So I have 5 parameters, such that I get a good trade-off between my privacy guarantee and my utility. So in some sense, what you want to ensure is your privacy guarantee is given, and you want to improve your utility, your test accuracy as much as possible. That is the concept. So this aspect, Shailesh will cover in the next session. And another aspect that Shailesh will cover is, imagine you have some model that's already trained, because training is good. Training last time is not a ridiculous stage itself, and you are not going to be able to train them from scratch, even if you have an algorithm. So for a trained LLM, how do you ensure that it you can still get private outputs from a training? Is also one thing which either it will come in the post-tweet section or I think Shailesh will also present some other new advancements. The key takeaways for me would be that what are the privacy, what do we expect for a private algorithm to have? It should be composable, as in from the same data set you run the algorithm multiple times. For example, like gradient descent, same data set, you are taking multiple gradient steps, but you don't lose privacy in one shot. Like, imagine it would be very stupid if you had gradient descent and you use some algorithm to anonymize gradient descent, but when you took the second gradient step, you lost our privacy. Okay, that's a very nonsense. So first you should have composability. Second is post-processing. Once you apply your algorithm, no matter what nonsense I do, even if I get extra information in the future, even if I do something else, I should not be able to break the privacy guarantee. Right? Third is some qualitative metric, and fourth is user level, in the sense that even if I'm keeping privacy for the entire group, in that process I should not lose the privacy of any individual. Okay, that's the entire, the big four things that we want any private model to be able to do. From that we thought, let us define it in terms of distinguishing between two models trained on neighboring data sets, such that they differ only by one data point, so that we can identify whether the data point is useful or not, that it is used in training or not. And we have a very powerful adversary that has the data set, the algorithm, the data point, and is just trying to do anything possible to distinguish between the two models. Then what we took is we took a coin toss example, biased coin and a fair coin, and we checked whether it is possible to identify at what case we can say that the coin is biased or not. And we saw the Neyman-Pearson lemma that stated that the optimal test statistic to make that decision is the ratio of the likelihoods, where the likelihood is, given this empirical observation, how likely is it, what is the, how likely is it that the coin is biased or unbiased. So the ratio of the two likelihoods give you the optimal test statistic. We also saw that the optimal test statistic depends on how wrong you are okay with being, in the sense that like even if the coin is unbiased, with some probability you might be wrong if you just say that, if I get 9 out of 10 hits, I'm going to call it biased. So what is that threshold I'm comfortable with? So I define that threshold at the start, and with that threshold I work backwards, right, to find the point at which I have to be. And we saw also that false positivity rate is related to a threshold. Then we went from the Neyman-Pearson and that hypothesis testing thing to we thought maybe we can apply that same logic to a data set distinguishability thing. So we saw that maybe if two data sets are very far apart, they're easy to distinguish. If two distributions are very far apart, they're easy to distinguish. So then if they're much closer together, they are hard to distinguish. So maybe we'll use some definition of that sort. But now our problem is, it occurs for all kinds of data points and all kinds of data sets, and in any setting should be able to work. And that alone is kind of too strict, in the sense that if you do gradient descent with it, you get an obnoxiously high epsilon, which is again basically saying no privacy guarantee. Or either if you want a privacy guarantee, then you have to add so much noise to your data that you are not even getting gradients anymore, it's just adding noise on top of it. So now our next thing was, can I be slightly kinder? In the sense that can I reduce how strict I am? So I say I can be wrong with some probability data. Other than that, right? But I can be wrong with some probability data. And then in some math I'm skipping, I'm going to say that I'm wrong with the probability data is not good enough. And instead, I will look at how fast these scales decay. If these scales decay very fast, based on that I'll make some new definition of privacy. And under that definition of privacy, I come up with an algorithm which shows that I can add a reasonable amount of noise to my thing to ensure that I still maintain some privacy guarantee that I want. And now the point is, how do we actually figure out about these things? I understand this is a huge bunch of concepts in a very, very short time, and I don't think I did a very good job motivating in section, but I will give you reading what we said, session notes and questions, so that in case you find any of these interesting, in the sense that you find Neyman-Pearson interesting, you want to read up about that, or you find basic probability and moment generating functions interesting, you want to read about that. You want to look again at these different definitions of privacy. You want to look at composition. All of that, I'll give you some basic material so that you can read and get a feel for it. And I'll point you to resources such that you can go to whatever depth and understand what it is. Okay, that's the entire session. So in some sense, this is the, I'd say if not anything else, what I want you to take away is that you ultimately want to see how difficult it is for some algorithm to determine whether this problem is the key problem that you want to, what I want you to take away. I want you to take away that the problem that we are trying to identify is how likely is it that data point X was in the data set or not. That is the key takeaway. Okay? The key takeaway is we want to see whether it is easy to distinguish between two data sets that are named different, right? And to formalize that, we end up doing a lot of things. And once we do that, we are able to come up with that. But this is the key thing which I want you at this stage to do. Thank you very much.